On June 15, 1944, on Saipan Island, Japanese intelligence officer Lieutenant Yoshio Yamamoto found himself confronting an unprecedented challenge. From his concealed bunker beneath the tangled roots of banyan trees, he listened intently through his headset to American radio transmissions. What he heard defied all logic and experience. The voices transmitted freely across open frequencies, with seemingly no concern for enemy interception, speaking in strange, guttural syllables that bore no resemblance to any known language. For 2 years prior to this moment, Japanese cryptographers had demonstrated remarkable proficiency in breaking American codes with methodical efficiency. Their intelligence apparatus had successfully penetrated numerous Allied communication systems, from British ciphers to Chinese military dispatches. American encryption methods, including those produced by sophisticated machines like the M209 converter and Sagaba devices, had been systematically analyzed and broken by highly trained linguists and mathematicians operating from Tokyo's Nakano Military Intelligence School. Japan had assembled some of the world's finest cryptographic minds, scholars who had studied at prestigious institutions like Oxford and Berlin, and who possessed deep understanding of English, French, Russian, and Mandarin. They had achieved significant success in decoding diplomatic communications and naval ciphers used across various theaters of war. This track record had instilled in them a confident belief that no message system could ultimately resist their analytical capabilities. The emergence of an unsolvable puzzle. However, beginning in the summer of 1942, a fundamental shift occurred. Across multiple Pacific Island locations, including the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, American Marine units began transmitting messages in a form that completely defied analysis. The syllables resisted all attempts at categorization. These transmissions were not English spoken in reverse, nor were they standard substitution ciphers or encrypted messages from rotor machines. The communications possessed an organic, fluid quality that seemed utterly impossible to decode. Japanese intelligence officers meticulously recorded hours of these mysterious transmissions, filling magnetic reels with the distinctive cadence of what they could not yet identify as Navajo speech. These recordings were transported to Tokyo, where Japan's most accomplished linguists assembled in secure facilities beneath military headquarters. They subjected the tapes to intensive analysis, playing them repeatedly, slowing the speed, isolating individual syllables, and desperately searching for recognizable patterns. One specialist, who had devoted a decade to studying indigenous languages throughout the Pacific region, attempted to match the phonemes against Ainu, various Polynesian dialects, and Aboriginal languages from Australia and Southeast Asia. No connections could be established. Another analyst, who had received training at Columbia University before the outbreak of hostilities, theorized that the language might be of Native American origin. However, this realization provided little practical assistance, as North America contained more than 300 indigenous languages, many of which remained unrecorded and were spoken by fewer than 1,000 individuals scattered across remote reservations. Even if Japanese cryptographers could successfully identify the specific language family, they would require access to native speakers, comprehensive grammatical dictionaries, detailed cultural context, and accurate phonetic transcriptions. The Imperial Army possessed none of these essential resources. As days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months, the mysterious voices continued coordinating artillery strikes, troop movements, and supply operations, all conducted openly and without apparent fear of enemy comprehension. Desperate attempts at understanding. In their frustration, Japanese commanders in the field pursued alternative investigative approaches. They captured American radio equipment and examined technical manuals for potential clues. They interrogated prisoners of war regarding communication procedures. One captured Marine, when questioned intensively about the mysterious language, provided only minimal information, stating simply that it was a local dialect, before refusing to elaborate further. Japanese intelligence analysts even developed theories that the Americans might be employing Japanese-American soldiers to deliberately transmit fabricated nonsense designed to waste enemy analytical resources. However, the phonetic consistency observed in the transmissions was too precise and too systematically organized to support this hypothesis. The evidence clearly indicated a genuine language, simply one that no one in Tokyo possessed the capability to identify or understand. The genesis of an unbreakable code. What Japanese intelligence could not possibly know was that the Navajo Code Talkers were not merely speaking their native language, they had transformed it into a sophisticated military weapon. In the spring of 1942, Philip Johnston, a civil engineer and World War I veteran who had spent his childhood as the son of Protestant missionaries on the Navajo reservation, presented an audacious proposal to Lieutenant Colonel James E. Jones of the United States Marine Corps. He suggested utilizing Navajo as the foundation for an unbreakable military code. The Navajo language possessed several characteristics that made it ideal for this purpose. It was extraordinarily complex, tonal in nature, completely unwritten, and known exclusively to the Diné people of the American Southwest. Its grammatical syntax bore absolutely no resemblance to any European or Asian language. Navajo had no standardized alphabet and no established written form. It existed purely in oral tradition, passed down through generations by word of mouth alone, residing only in the voices of its speakers. Johnston's proposal went beyond simply using the Navajo language as spoken. He recommended that Navajo Marines develop specialized code words within their own language, creating metaphors for military terminology that did not exist in traditional vocabulary. Through this system, a tank became chidi nanai, literally meaning tortoise. A battleship became tlak, meaning whale. A dive bomber became gini, translating to chicken hawk. A submarine became besh luk, or iron fish. The first group of 29 Navajo recruits arrived at Camp Pendleton in May 1942 and undertook the task of constructing a comprehensive military lexicon comprising over 211 specialized terms. These men committed every word and every phrase to memory, deliberately never writing anything down to maintain absolute security. Their efficiency proved remarkable. They could transmit a 3-line English message in approximately 20 seconds, a task that required cipher machines roughly 30 minutes to complete. In combat situations, this speed differential could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. The recruits varied widely in age, ranging from teenagers to men in their 30s. Some had attended government boarding schools where speaking Navajo was strictly prohibited and punishable by physical beatings. Others had never ventured beyond the boundaries of the reservation. However, all carried the language deeply within them, embedded in their consciousness through prayers and the songs their grandmothers had sung over their cradles in childhood. The impenetrability of the code. Even if Japanese linguists had somehow managed to learn conversational Navajo, an achievement that would have been essentially impossible given the language's geographic isolation and inherent complexity, the specialized code words would have remained completely meaningless. How could any outsider deduce that Debe le Gini Base Ligai meant America, a phrase that literally translated to sheep, horse, ice ant? How could one reverse engineer that City Mai meant dive bomber, literally translating as bird owl bomb? The code operated on multiple layers, deeply cultural and intuitive only to those who lived within the tradition and understood its contextual references. Lieutenant Yamamoto, still monitoring transmissions from his bunker on Saipan, could not have known that the voices he recorded belonged to men such as Chester Nez, Samuel Bison, and Carl Gorman. These were individuals who, as children, had been forbidden from speaking their language in American boarding schools, punished for whispering Navajo words, and told that their culture was dying and that complete assimilation represented their only viable future. Now that same language, that same previously forbidden tongue, was saving American lives by the thousands across the Pacific theater. Deployment and combat effectiveness. By 1945, more than 400 Navajo Code Talkers had been deployed throughout the Pacific theater of operations. They worked consistently in pairs, never alone, always positioned within range of radios that crackled with Japanese communications. At Iwo Jima, they transmitted over 800 messages during the first 48 hours of battle without committing a single error. At Peleliu, Code Talkers coordinated close air support while operating under heavy mortar fire, maintaining calm, steady voices even as explosions devastated palm trees in their immediate vicinity. At Okinawa, they coordinated naval bombardments while Japanese officers listened helplessly, their recording devices spinning uselessly, capturing sounds they possessed no means to convert into actionable intelligence. Major Howard Connor, 5th Marine Division signal officer, would later document in writing that without the Navajo Code Talkers, the Marines would never have successfully taken Iwo Jima. The Japanese military understood that Americans were communicating, they knew that coordinates were being transmitted, targets identified, and reinforcements requested. However, they remained utterly powerless to act upon this knowledge. The burden of secrecy. The Code Talkers themselves spoke very little about their wartime service following the conclusion of hostilities. They had been placed under strict oaths of secrecy and informed that the code might be required in future conflicts, necessitating that its existence remain concealed even after achieving victory. They returned home to reservations where significant poverty awaited them, where the government that had utilized their language during wartime still did not grant them complete citizenship rights, and where they could not exercise voting rights in Arizona or New Mexico until 1948. They resumed previous lives herding sheep, working in construction, and pursuing occupations that bore no visible trace of the battles they had fought or the critical role they had played in military victory. The Japanese Archive. In Tokyo, during the final months of the war, Japanese intelligence personnel archived their accumulated recordings in wooden crates, labeling them as unidentified American dialect, and noting that further study would be required. The crates were sealed and placed in a basement archive facility. They were never reopened or examined again. After Japan's formal surrender in August 1945, American occupation forces discovered these recordings during routine archival surveys. Covered in dust and long forgotten, the reels contained the preserved voices of Navajo men echoing from magnetic tape in the language of their grandmothers, the language of Red Canyon winds and summer thunderstorms. The Japanese had attempted to break the code using logic, technology, and the complete resources of an empire. They failed because they did not comprehend that certain things cannot be broken through analysis alone, but must instead be honored and understood within their proper cultural context. Recognition and legacy. The Navajo Code remained officially classified until 1968, fully 25 years after the war's conclusion. When it was finally declassified and made public, the men who had developed and used it were elderly, their hair silver, their hands worn from decades of manual labor. They gathered at official ceremonies where generals pinned medals on their chests and formally recognized them as heroes. President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th as National Code Talkers Day in 1982. In 2001, the original 29 Code Talkers received congressional gold medals in recognition of their extraordinary service. However, the Code Talkers themselves did not emphasize concepts of heroism when discussing their experiences. They spoke instead of duty, of utilizing what was uniquely theirs, what had been suppressed, ridiculed, and nearly erased to defend a nation that had not always defended them or respected their rights and culture. Chester Nez, the last surviving member of the original 29 Code Talkers, passed away in 2014 at the age of 93. His language, once strictly forbidden in American educational institutions, now occupies a place of honor in the congressional record as the communication system that could not be broken by enemy intelligence. Conclusion: a testament to resilience. In the final analysis, the Japanese recordings captured something far more significant than mere military transmissions. They captured the sound of profound resilience, of a people who had survived conquest, forced displacement, and systematic attempts at cultural assimilation, and who still chose to contribute their unique gifts in defense of their nation. The wire spools hold no answers to the questions Japanese cryptographers sought to resolve, only the echoes of questions the empire lacked the cultural framework to formulate. How does one break a code born directly from the land itself, embedded in centuries of cultural tradition? How does one decode the very essence of survival and cultural persistence? The Navajo Code Talkers did not save America through conventional military force. They saved it through words their grandmothers had taught them, words older than warfare, words that proved stronger than steel and more impenetrable than any mechanical encryption device. Their contribution stands as an enduring testament to the power of cultural preservation and the unexpected ways in which diversity serves as a source of national strength.